Last week's Swamp Watch on China got you really fired up. Well, there is a lot more where that came from. We've barely scratched the surface of China's corrupt takeover of our ruling elite. China, Part 2, is this week's Swamp Watch. Last week we told you about lobbying firms hired by Chinese state-owned or government-backed businesses and organizations to push their interests in Washington, D.C. But to really understand the swampiness in all its glory, you need to know the names behind these lobbying firms, the actual lobbyists who are selling their own government experience, paid for by you, the taxpayer, remember, to help foreign governments and, in the case of China, America's #1 enemy. We told you last week that the Chinese state-owned company Sinopec Group hired Cowen Strategies to fix meetings with members of Congress. Who's behind Cowen Strategies? Someone called Mark Cowen. From 1990 to 92, he worked as a commissioner in the Department of Labor. In 1993, he joined the CIA, working there for 7 years, before deciding to cash in on his experience and contacts by becoming a lobbyist. He worked at 4 different firms, including a 12-year stint at Patton Boggs, which would later become the infamous Squire Patton Boggs. And since 2013, he's been running his own lobbying outfit, Cowen Strategies. We also told you about Capital Counsel, which has earned $100,000 so far this year on a contract with the China-US Exchange Foundation, or CUSEF, an organization working to promote Chinese interests both by hiring lobbyists and funding research at prominent DC think tanks. Now, why on earth would China hire Capital Counsel? Was it because of Jennifer Bang, who served 10 years as legislative director for Republican Congressman Ander Crenshaw, a member of the powerful House Appropriations Committee? Or was it because of Aaron Cohen, who worked as a policy advisor and then chief of staff to disgraced former GOP Senator John Ensign? Perhaps it was Capital Counsel's Bob Brooks that sealed the deal. He was chief of staff to former Republican Congressman Jim McCreary, a member of the influential House Ways and Means Committee. But wait, Capital Counsel offers insider connections even better than Congressman Jim McCreary's chief of staff. They now offer the services of Congressman McCreary. You've got to hand it to Capital Counsel. Why stop at the monkey when you can hire the organ grinder? But it turns out that McCreary isn't the only representative of the American people who cashed out to work for the interests of America's top enemy. Former Arizona Congressman Matt Salmon chaired the Asia and Pacific Subcommittee on the House Foreign Relations Committee before leaving Congress to become Vice President of Government Affairs at Arizona State University. Arizona State is home to a Confucius Institute, an enterprise funded by China to push its agenda on American campuses. In response to critics of the institute, Salmon argued the United States should work with China, not against them. But they are working against us, and Congressman Salmon is helping them. Perhaps the single biggest help China got from America in recent years was its entry into the World Trading System and being awarded Most Favored Nation trading status. Guess who was one of the leading advocates for that in Congress at the time? You know him well. It was good old John Boehner. When the US was approaching a debt ceiling, Boehner even argued that we ought to prioritize our debts to China over paying US troops. So, after all that hard work sucking up to China in Congress, guess where Speaker Boehner ended up after leaving Congress? At swampy Squire Patton Boggs, which lobbies for the Chinese embassy in Washington. I've said it before and I'll say it again tonight. What the hell does a foreign government need lobbyists for? Isn't that the whole point of ambassadors and embassies, to represent a country's interests? The only conclusion we can draw is that the swamp is more powerful than government. China knows it can accomplish more through lobbying than diplomacy. But that only works because our elected officials allow it to work, because they agree to meet with all these foreign government lobbyists. So the real question is, who is meeting with them and what are they discussing? We called 30 members of Congress in both parties and both houses and asked a simple question. Have you ever met with a lobbyist representing the Chinese government, a Chinese state-owned enterprise, or a non-profit organization promoting Chinese interests? Every single one refused to answer. And the outrageous thing about that is there's no requirement for them to answer or to be transparent about this. They're your representatives, paid with your money to represent your interests, and yet there is absolutely zero requirement for them to disclose which lobbyists they're meeting with and what they're discussing. By the way, here are some of the things they do have to disclose: their financial assets and personal income, positions with non-governmental organisations, campaign donations, travel expenses, legal expenses, gifts, staff salaries and office expenditures. They're required by law to disclose how many Keurig coffee cups or paper clips they buy, but they're not required to disclose the lobbyists they meet with who are pushing the interests of a hostile foreign power that hacks our infrastructure, steals our technology, spies on our intelligence, names their dictator president for life, and has a publicly stated aim of world domination. China is the #1 enemy of the United States. It is outrageous that we allow them to undermine our democracy by infiltrating the swamp and manipulating our leaders. We will keep exposing them here on Swamp Watch until someone does something about it.